We are the restaurant brokers, and we sell restaurants.
We started the nation's largest restaurant brokerage firm over a decade ago.
Atlanta, Georgia was our starting point, but our brand is spreading nationwide. We define restaurant brokerage and help buyers just like these.
Our dream, our goal, open up a restaurant, loving life, serving people breakfast and lunch, and then enjoying the rest of the day with them and ourselves.
Buying an existing restaurant, leasing a closed restaurant space, or purchasing a restaurant franchise. We help buyers satisfy their appetite for acquisition.
I'm part of a husband and wife team with this fella.
Working with my wife has been a lot of fun. The ultimate goal for everybody here is to make this work. And because we have different strengths, we bring different angles to the deal.
The process begins with our powerhouse website, WeSellRestaurants.com, where buyers sign online confidentiality agreements and browse restaurants for sale.
Then we send buyers undercover to check out a restaurant and decide if it's the right one for them.
Buyers get our proprietary business analysis tool with all the financial details on the business for sale.
After studying the restaurant inside and out, it's back to our office.
We're deal makers. We write contracts and negotiate terms for buyers and sellers. That's why we sell more restaurants than any other firm in the nation. We are the restaurant brokers. Our name says it all. I'm Robin Gagnon.
And I'm Eric Gagnon, and we sell restaurants. We started the nation's largest restaurant brokerage firm, We Sell Restaurants, over a decade ago. You can find us online at WeSellRestaurants.com.
We are on the radio once a week with the leading authorities in the restaurant industry talking about subjects trending in the business. Tweet your own questions while we're on the air. Our Twitter handle is @SellRestaurants. Post to our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/WeSellRestaurants. If we don't get to your question, we'll follow up on social media.
Our goal is to satisfy your appetite for acquisition, feed the need for restaurant reality, and serve up a recipe for business success. If you have any ideas or any comments about the show, feel free to email me. You can email me at Eric, that's ERIC, @WeSellRestaurants.com.
Today, we're getting wild. That's right. We're speaking with experts who work with fresh-from-the-field items in their restaurant. They are going to share their expertise on fresh-caught and prepared cuisine. Our first guest today is Scott Leysath, better known as the Sporting Chef. Scott has been an executive chef for more than 20 years and is the leading authority on the proper preparation of fish and game. He is the author of multiple cookbooks, the most recent being the Sporting Chef's Better Venison Cookbook. As the executive chef for Sportsman Channel's Hunt, Fish, Feed program, he helped create the wild game menu volunteers serve at shelters across the country. He is also the cooking editor of Ducks Unlimited magazine and writes for a number of other publications. Scott makes numerous appearances on outdoor television, radio programs, events, and trade shows nationwide. His current TV shows include The Sporting Chef, Hunt, Fish, Cook, and Dead Meat on Sportsman Channel. Scott, great to have you here.
Good. It's good to be here. And dead meat's got a nice ring to it, don't you think?
I love it.
I like that.
We also have a couple of other guests. We're also joined by Mark Estee. Mark Estee is a community leader and nationally recognized chef who is dedicated to building a thriving restaurant culture in the Reno and Lake Tahoe area. Extending its footprint across northern Nevada and northern California, Estee owns and or operate 8 restaurants where menu offerings encompass his philosophy of simple, seasonal, fresh, and local. The atmosphere you may want, warm, lively, and inviting, just like him. Estee's reputation for supporting local farmers and food supplier is ingrained into each restaurant concept and used as an example within the slow food movement. He is often heard asking, "Do you know where your food comes from?" He's a staple among the food community, and his business practices are recognized as progressive, thoughtful, and direct. Continuing developing new dishes based on his whole hog philosophy, Estee builds flavor food using every portion of every ingredient. Mark, so glad to have you here today.
Oh, great to be here. Thank you so much.
And our third guest is Tenney Flynn. During the past 13 years of co-owning legendary New Orleans fine dining seafood GW Finn's, executive chef Tenney Flynn has become known as one of the country's foremost seafood experts, as well as a vocal enthusiast for a bounty of seafood available in the Gulf. Since launching GW Finn's more than a decade ago, Chef Flynn has developed a reputation as one of the most knowledgeable and discriminating seafood chefs in the country. Chef Flynn is a master of his craft, but one who is completely unassuming, and that is until you ask him about seafood. Then his wealth of knowledge and passion about the business is unmistakable. A seafood icon, asked to judge national competitions and provide cooking demonstrations for fellow chefs and consumers, He became a national celebrity for his weekly cooking segments on the syndicated fishing show, The Big Fish. For the second time in the past 13 years, GW Finn's executive chef and co-owner has been New Orleans Magazine's Chef of the Year, both in 2004 and again in 2011. Chef, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, good morning.
Okay, so really interesting backgrounds, and we love this topic. I just want to kick it off with a thought process about what you guys are doing in terms of your cooking philosophy. What drove you to be part of this movement to bring game direct from the shore or from the field, as it were, onto the menu? Scott, you kind of stand out in that field. Why don't you start us off?
Well, I've always hunted and fished, and I actually grew up in Virginia. My dad was a Alabama farm boy, and then I moved to California, went to school in Arizona, and we would have wild game on our menu at the restaurant, and people would say, how come my duck doesn't taste like your duck? The biggest difference being that the duck that you have in a restaurant, the fatty duck, that a lot of people think, God, duck is so greasy, but the wild duck has very little fat on it at all. I mean, if it's flown back and forth from Canada a time or two, it's going to be a very lean, healthy animal. So, my whole motivation was to let other people to make other people understand that truly wild game has a very different flavor than the farm-raised game. And, when people would tell me that something tastes gamey, Andrew Zimmern will describe something as gamey on Bizarre Foods. And I kind of flinch when I hear that because I don't think most people consider gamey good. So, my whole motivation is to take the game out of game without covering it up with sauces and wrapping it in bacon and those kinds of things. Game tastes good. It just requires a different style of cooking.
I love that. Game tastes good. Okay, Mark, you've got to weigh in with those credentials that we read from your bio. What do you think?
Well, we find in the restaurants that people really love to know where their food comes from. And when you can pull things out of the ocean or pull from local ranchers or, even sometimes find some wild game here, if someone goes out and gets a nice elk, for us to kind of help them prepare that, for them to get involved and maybe show them some of the tricks of the trade that we use in the restaurant for the home chefs, or if we can really be able to focus on, hey, this beef came from this ranch, and people really love the fact that they know where it comes from and they feel connected to it, and it's local and it's delicious, and that's what we love to do around here.
Good. Tenney, you'd like to chime in on that as well?
Well, the wild seafood is really, I think, more people. That's the last wild food that most people eat. I mean, it's the, I can't serve game in the restaurant that somebody shot unless occasionally somebody will bring something in and I'll cook it for them. I have one particular guest that only eats wild land animals, but that's hardly worth mentioning. But 70% of my menu comes out of the Gulf of Mexico, and it's and the climate here really doesn't lend itself to growing a lot of things. We grow some citrus. It's just too hot. We grow bananas here. A really rough winter, it kills the banana trees. We go years without a hard freeze. But what we do grow here better than just about anybody else in the United States, is wild seafood out of the Gulf of Mexico. And, that's the most exciting part of my day is sourcing that. We buy all whole fish, we butcher in-house, and we kind of are getting closer to, the nose to tail on the fish. I started off with fish collars. I just got back from a trip to Indonesia, and I'm going to finally bite the bullet and menu fish heads. I think people are ready for that now. And in a lot of Asian countries, they would much prefer eating the head than the fillet. So you just have to get people used to eating the bones. It's
interesting.
Okay, I'm tweeting that, just so you know. Who said people are ready to eat the fish head in the U.S.? I think Eric has a question.
I like it. Scott, you got to touch a little bit about, how it is different way of cooking. So I wanted to expand a little bit on that. You know, we talk about fish here, we talk about wild games. You know, you're preparing that differently than other restaurants, like you said, whether they have a farm-raised duck or something. Can you expand a little bit on that and talk about some of the technique and some of the ways you guys prepare food for the guest?
Well, the biggest difference to me is the biggest mistake that home chefs make is that they overcook it. If you take a duck breast and you cut it in half and you cook half of it medium well and half of it medium rare, it's two completely different pieces of duck. And when people do bring us their wild duck for us to cook it for them, and like the other guy said, we can't serve you wild game that we went out and shot, which is where I'll be tomorrow morning. But but we can cook yours for you. One of the things that I always recommend that people do with their wild game, the stuff they bring home, their waterfowl, is to put it in a brine. Put it in a very simple brine, get the blood out. The wild duck blood doesn't taste good. Dry aging will also help get rid of some of that capillary blood where a lot of the waste is carried, and it'll make it more tender. And so people, they're starting to get it. I've got a lot of people who have decided a long time ago they don't eat game, and they'll try a piece of properly prepared, lightly brined, seasoned, and duck that's been cooked rare to medium rare, and this is the breast that's rare to medium rare, and they'll say, man, this isn't gamey at all. The legs and thighs require different kinds of cooking. It's kind of like we don't normally cook a whole cow, but people will take a duck and they'll stuff it with apples and oranges and wild rice and all this other stuff that basically inhibits cooking the inside part of the breast. It slows it down. I cook it in parts. The legs and thighs I'm going to brown and braise, cook them slowly until they just about fall off the bone. I'll make stock out of the bodies, and the breasts are rare to medium rare. So as opposed to the home chef who might just stuff it with something because it was in the LL Bean catalog 40 years ago and cook it until it turns gray and then say, man, I don't think I like the taste of duck. We show them how to break it apart and cook it the right way.
And so all of you are really tied into this this guest need and your own need to really be on the fresh food side of the industry. So, Mark, tell us a little bit about that for you. What drew you to, really answering the question for the consumer, where is this food coming from, and how is it that you believe that continues to grow in the marketplace?
Well, maybe about 14 years ago, I was doing a stage, which is an unpaid working externship, if you will, and I was staging at Chef Tenney in Berkeley. And on the last day, I was there for 3 weeks. And the last day, I met Alice Waters, and she said to me, "Oh, you live up in Reno, Lake Tahoe?" I said, "Yep." And she says, "Where'd you get your food from?" And I said, "Oh, the food guy." I get the guy from we call it the produce guy, and we call it the meat guy, and then we call it the fish guy. And she says, "Well, do you know where your food comes from? How come you don't know about anything that's around there?" And that kind of began my quest, because I said to her, "I don't know." And she said, "Why not?" So then I came and I got my car, and I came back to work and made a few phone calls and found a local farmer, and then we found a couple local ranchers, and over the last 14 years we've developed relationships with well over 100 of those people. And some of them didn't exist until we started asking, and they started thinking, "Oh, wait, we can sell to restaurants? Okay, good, we can get these products into not only at the farmers markets, but let's try to get them into this distribution chain so we can get these products to more local chefs, which gets them in the hands of more local people."
Right. Now, Chef Tenney, I have a question for you, because you actually do have a license to spear your own fish, and that's
I do.
I want to hear about that.
I've got a commercial license and I've got a gear license, so I can. You have to jump through a lot of hoops, and actually I have to have a federal license as well, because a lot of the offshore stuff is actually in federal waters. So sometimes you'll go out, 15 or 20 miles, and the fish is illegal, but 3 miles in state waters, it's kind of a strange thing. But I've been scuba diving about 4 years, which I think is kind of natural for somebody that sells fish for a living. The oil rigs or the oil platforms off the coast of Louisiana are probably the best spearfishing in the world. it's unbelievable. In Florida, in an hour dive, you might see 2 or 3 game fish, and 75 feet down out of the rigs, you see 200 or 300. And I'm just beginning to. And you rig with a steel cable instead of monofilament because of the. So it's a little bit hairy because. You shoot the big fish. A lot of them, if you don't hit them just right, they head straight down, and you have to, make the choice. Do I want to keep my gun or do I want to live?
Yeah, it sounds like you've made the right choice so far.
Well, I'm shooting small cooperative fish.
Oh.
Number one, when you dive, you want to surface. Number 2, you want to surface with all your gear. Number 3, you want to surface with all your gear and some fish. But the number 1 is the main thing.
Right.
I would agree.
What we have done lately is we're shooting lionfish, which are an invasive species from the Pacific, which are just going crazy everywhere. I was at a trip in Pensacola not long ago. They eat everything and nothing eats them. They have venomous spines. Luckily, they're very good to eat. So, but as it stands right now, the only method of getting them is to hand spear them. But you can spear them with Hawaiian slings, which is pretty quick. And they.
So you're helping the ecosystem as well as providing a new source of food for the guests.
Right. And so we're trying to create a market for them, and it's hard to do because they're relatively small. You have to shoot 40 or 50 of them. It has to be worth the diver's while to take them to a wholesaler to sell them, and then the wholesaler has to put his markup on them to sell them to somebody else. And you get about a 20% yield. So if I'm paying $4 a pound for a lionfish, it means a fillet costs me $20. So they're great in ceviche. They're a wonderful fish. It's not like you're trying to convince people that Asian carp are good to eat or nutria. And nutria aren't terrible to eat. Like I said, the customer that I have, it's Dr. John. He's an iconic New Orleans piano player. He only eats wild land animals, so he will bring me raccoons and nutrias and things like that. And I did, pull out my old LL Bean Game and Fish, which, like the other gentleman said, everything starts off with soak it in salt water overnight, which is brining. And if you brine this meat and brown it and, cook it in gravy, it's pretty good to eat. I did find the raccoon superior to the nutria.
Wow.
We have a duck down here that's it's locally called a pool dew. It's a variety of coot, which is really, really good. You breast them out, and then we they have a very large gizzard. You can make a gumbo, out of the legs and thighs and gizzards, and really, I tell people all the time, any fish or almost any fish is good if it's fresh and properly prepared. And I really think you can say the same thing about game. And I hate that expression, gamey. Gamey to me is like fishy. It's not a descriptive, flavor terminology.
Sure. So, hey, Scott, we want to change the subject a little bit. I want to ask you about one experience you have. You're all over the Sportsman Channel, and I want to know, how did that come about? How did they find you? You find them? Well, how did that went up for you?
Well, it wasn't a well-planned career path. I've always done the fish and game thing, and I actually started on HGTV in the late 90s with a guy named Paul James, who also had a show called Gardening by the Yard, and,
I remember that show.
You remember Gardening by the Yard?
Yes.
I do.
And so he had another show called Homegrown Cooking, and I was on both sides of the camera with him, and we did about 185 shows, and I'm thinking, TV seems a lot easier than the restaurant business. And I'd been in the restaurant. I was a corporate VP for a 33-unit chain, my own restaurant, my own catering business. I still do, now I do a lot of guest chef things around the country, which works out really well because at the end of the day, I can just leave.
Right.
And for those who don't appreciate those of us who run restaurants, it's a lot of work. And so my deal, I was doing noon news segments at the restaurant whenever we would do an exotic food event, and somebody noticed and they said, hey, you want to be on HGTV? So I kind of fell into it, and realized that I didn't have to have a whole bunch of employees and workers' comp and all these kind of things, and it's a better way to go. You know, anyone can have a show on outdoor TV as long as you have sponsors. So I hate to demystify that, but if you've got sponsors, you can be on any of the outdoor channels, and I'm no exception. I'm living proof that anyone can have a TV show.
Okay, so see, we use that same philosophy to talk people into being restaurant brokers. We have a lot of former restaurateurs who say, I love the industry, I want to be in it, but I just am tired of the hours and the employees and all the tough stuff. So go on TV or become a restaurant broker. There you go.
Yeah, and it'll end up being just as much work, but at least it's something different.
Exactly. So I want to ask all of you to weigh in, and Mark, maybe we'll start with you. Where do you see the industry going? You guys were early adopters and embracers of really pushing the envelope of what was first farm to table, now game to table. Do you see us kind of all as Americans returning to our roots and going back after more original and organic and fresh as fresh can be food sources?
Yeah, I would think that's the natural next progression here, which is going to be, you know, more like microclimates, right? You're going to just kind of really stay within a certain amount of space around you, getting back to where it was, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Just pulling items and things from your local area. I think that's really important that people understand. Usually, well, one, that's a little greener. You don't have to have any, you know, travel miles or, you know, carbon offsets and things like that. But it's also, you're going to eat foods that are seasonal and around you, which are actually more healthy for you. You know, if we can all kind of focus on just staying as close as we can to where we are, I think that's going to be the next challenge and the next way the movement seems to be going.
Tenney, how about you? What's your take on that?
You know, I grew up literally grew up in the business. My earliest memories are my dad's restaurant when I was a little boy, and, you know, that was in the 50s. And, you know, I think restaurants have gotten so much better in America, you know, in the last, you know, 30 or 40 years. You know, and I think, you know, that they're incredible taste coming from all over the world. You know, we're not all locked into the European model anymore, even though most of us, you know, learn to cook that way. And I think anybody in the world, whether they buy their food at Walmart, if you put a good chicken and a commodity chicken down and you go, okay, there's the difference. You know, it's worth paying twice as much for this chicken. The same thing with heirloom breeds of pork. You know, you take a commodity pork chop and an artisanally raised pork chop, and you go, yeah, it costs twice as much, but, you know, it's so much better. And I was corporate chef for Ruth's Chris for 7 years. I've eaten a hell of a lot of feedlot beef. And the thing with me, you know, there's 100,000 steers, you know, give or take, slaughtered every day in the United States. I still, you know, I think grass-fed beef is not going to be received as well as feedlot beef in a lot of cases. There's a lot of really lean, dry, you know, not wonderful grass-fed beef on the market. I'd like to see, you know, and that's a very, very complicated issue. I mean, nobody likes feedlots. Nobody likes, you know, that whole idea. But, you know, the grass-fed, something needs to be done to make that more palatable to the general public before they're able to, you know, it's not as a dramatic a difference to me as the chicken and the pig. So I don't know what the answer is, but
it is a complex issue, that's for sure. And Scott, you want to weigh in very quickly here? We're coming up against the break. What's your take on that next step?
Well, you know, I think Food Network has changed the way people feel about their food. I mean, 25 years ago, we weren't thinking about free-range anything or Chipotle this and that, and now you see it at Burger King.
I love that answer, and I want to talk a little bit more about that when we come back after the break, because I do agree.
Wild Game and Burger King, stay tuned.
Yeah. This is Eric and Robin Gagnon. We're the Restaurant Brokers. Stay tuned, because we have some great guests who are telling us about game on the menu, and boy, do they have some great credentials for that. Stay tuned. We're your industry authority and source for information. This is Eric and Robin Gagnon. We'll be right back after this timeout.